Montana. Alright, so here we go, and wow, the cats are active again. I see everyone moving around, except Penelope. She's just posing. Aren't you, sweetie? Hmm? Willie? Come here, Willie. Hey. Oh, Willie doesn't want to come here. Alright, so we've talked about tying all these ideas together. We saw in this last part here how the belief, the narrative, however we want to describe that, the example group to which that narrative applies, generates the emotion, and then that yields the subsequent action tendencies, kind of tying all that together and how emotion and prejudice operate in tandem. Let's take a special example here. I want to talk a little bit about hatred, because this is one of the areas where prejudice and emotion has been most fully explored, is in the negative emotions, hatred being one of those. Although we'll get to differentiating that in a subsequent module. Hate, according to Sternberg, right, and those of you who did emotion in relationships got exceedingly familiar with Sternberg's triangle of love. Well, the triangle of love is a rather old phenomenon in social psychology, and well accepted. Sternberg, based on his work on the triangle of love, went on later to generate, in fact, the triangle of hatred. And it functions very much like the triangle of love. So those of you who did this paper will see the correlates quite readily. So hate, well, let's go with Maya Angelou. It's caused a lot of problems in the world, but it has not solved one yet, and that's a profound piece of thinking there. Largely, a lot of this comes then from Sternberg's book, The Psychology of Hate, and I find it fascinating the areas in which Sternberg has worked. A very prolific career. Three areas where Sternberg, I think, is huge is, of course, the triangle of love and that theory that's discussed in every frickin' social psychology course and course on relationships. And then you have the theory of hate, which is discussed to a lesser extent, probably because of the unpleasantness. And then he's also a huge researcher on creativity, written several books on creativity. Sternberg allows for combining emotions that yield hate. So disgust, fear, anger, contempt, and what he's then doing is kind of slicing and dicing hatred into levels of sub-hatred that are defined essentially by different emotions. Now, burning hate, or like the ultimate hate in Sternberg's language, combines all of them. So what do we see then? Well, remember, we have the passion, intimacy, and commitment. Those of you who did Triangle of Love know that those are the corners of Triangle of Love. But what happens when you turn them into the negative aspect? So the passion then, supporting hatred, is the generation of anger and or fear. The negation of intimacy, that is pushing away rather than becoming intimate, then takes top spot here, and that could be disgust, that you find people disgusting, and then you certainly don't want to be intimate with them, you want to increase your distance. And then commitment is the devaluation or the diminution. And the idea here is I'm committed to putting these people down. And nowhere did we see a commitment like this that as described when we look at pre-World War II and World War II, when we look at the commitment of the Germans to the destruction of the Jews, to the idea that in fact they killed 6 million Jews, and the goal was to make regions that the Germans invaded Judenfrei, which is free of Jews, and they wouldn't really rest until there were no Jews to be counted. And that's a heavy-duty commitment that required a huge amount of resources when you think about it. Now it was also supported by the stealing of the Jewish property, but I think ultimately it was probably a financial loser when it was all said and done. So Sternberg's 7 forms of hatred then derive from the different positions on the triangle. So cool hate is discussed, just the negation of intimacy alone, right? Hot hate is anger, fear, right? That is anger, fear of passion alone. And cold hate is the devaluation or the diminution. So that was the 3 corners, right, represent cool hate, hot hate, and cold hate. Now, boiling hate is revulsion, disgust, right, of the negation plus the anger and the fear of the passion. So boiling hate would represent this side of the triangle in Sternberg's world. And you can then just look at the definitions. A simmering hate is the disgust, right, and the commitment to that disgust. I hate those people and I will always hate those people, right? Seething hate, and then finally, as we described, burning hate. So you can kind of go through the ideas there as you wish in your own table. Let's get back to Sternberg's ideas, though. Believes that hatred is enhanced, maintained by the stories we tell. So yet here we have another example who's someone on board with kind of the narrative situation, whether it's Allport, whether it's Sternberg, and whoever else. We've come to believe that these emotions are the product of narratives that are created that communicate them and support them. To protect existing culture, it's necessary to destroy competing culture. Outgroups are evil victimizers. They're morally bankrupt. So we see this now, that we see many people talking in the news, especially fringe groups, talk about in terms of culture war. We're engaged in a culture war, and we have to protect, we have to defend our culture as if cultures can't coexist. I think one of the big problems is that we have to understand that cultures evolve. That what was a useful, workable culture maybe 200 years ago has lost its utility. Times have changed. And we see that people want to fight against that moving forward, Romans had a robust culture, but it didn't last, right? And you can look at any culture in existence, had its time, and then it moved away. And enough on that. So, an effective story will communicate. The target is revealed to be anathema, that is, disliked, it's horrible, it can't be tolerated. The target plans actions contrary to the interests of the in-group. So these people, I don't like them, they're horrible, and what they're about is to undo my group. The target makes its presence felt, right? So that is, they're gaining, think about if you're a white supremacist and you believe the white race is superior. Let's suppose you're a white separatist and you believe that the white race deserves its own land, not to be interfered with. And then you hear people talk about statistics that by the year 2050, right, that the United States will be predominantly Hispanic in origin. Think about a white supremacist or a white separatist is going, oh my God, by 2050, if we don't do something, this country will be Mexico. And kind of in their simple-minded explanation of that. And that generates a huge amount of anxiety and fear, right? And then those anxiety and fears, as I've described, morph relatively easily into anger, or as Sternberg would suggest, supports the development of hatred. So the target is achieving some success in its goals. They are making inroads. They are becoming more and more successful. And in fact, then we have the need to retaliate against this. And notice the concept of political correctness, when you get right down to it, is a manifestation of this to a certain extent. Oh my God, I can't say what I want to say at work anymore because I have to be politically correct. And that's an interesting kind of manifestation or explanation, or it enhances the narrative. Right? So through the story, finally, perception becomes reality. And that's how Sternberg views this. Let's talk a little more about empathy. Let's talk about power and empathy, right? And power destroys empathy. Power causes people, according to Keltner, to become more impulsive. And we've talked about anger and this impulsivity. Power is thought to do it as similar. Power causes people to become less risk aware. That is, they start to diminish the notion of risks. And we see this in a lot of very powerful world leaders who take some of the most insane risks to the detriment of their people, typically. Power become less adept at seeing things from other people's point of view. So if I have power, I don't really need to look at things from other people's point of view because I have power and they don't matter because they're less powerful. Power, right, according to Alpi, impairs a specific neural process, mirroring, that can be the cornerstone of empathy. And we've talked about empathic mirroring, we've talked about mirror neurons in the past, and we see that power may in fact then just shut that process down at a neural level. And for Fisk and Dupre, power lessens the need to have to read other people, because I don't have to read other people because they have to read me, because I'm the one in power. They got nothing for me, I got everything for them, so I don't need to pay attention to them. You know, Churchill, emotion and power. And you know, when we look at Winston Churchill as a wartime prime minister in Great Britain, he had virtually unlimited power at this point. You know, when we start talking about War Powers Acts and how it changes the nature of the position that wartime presidents, prime ministers, chancellors, whoever, have a tremendous increase in their level of power. And Clementine, right, admonished Churchill and his wife, said, who had the courage to write, my darling Winston, I must confess that I've noticed a deterioration in your manner. You're not as kind as you used to be. Written on the day Hitler entered Paris, torn up, then sent away, the letter was not a complaint but an alert. Someone had confided to her, she wrote, that Churchill had been acting so contemptuous towards subordinates in his meeting. So power was eroding his ability to be kind. Power justifies. And notice, when my power goes up and the context demands that I operate as a powerful leader, I often then kind of slip into the end justifies the means. So the means and my behavior in using the means begins to erode, because I feel justified that I have something bigger. I have something bigger to take care of, and you underlings don't understand what it is I'm trying to do, and just do as I say, right? And the empathy then begins to be eroded by this process. Now, this might be named a similar idea as hubris syndrome, as it's a disorder of the possession of power, particular power which has been associated with overwhelming success, right? Held for a period of years with minimal constraint on the leader. And this is a huge problem, because you know, our country, for example, American democracy was supposed to be built on a system of checks and balances. We have a tricameral process of the courts, the legislature, and the executive, and each one was supposed to keep the other in check, that is, to limit the amount of power available to any one of those three entities. As we lose the ability to hold accountable any one of those particular groups, as the power increases, then it becomes more conceited, it demonstrates more hubris, and loses the potential to be empathetic with those that these groups are supposed to serve. 14 clinical features include, but not limited to, right, manifest contempt for others, loss of contact with reality, so they don't function in the world with the rest of us, manifest contempt for others, restless or reckless actions, and not thinking about the consequences. So that ties much together that we've been talking about. And displays of incompetence, because people are no longer thinking, now they're just kind of reacting, and we see that their actions become increasingly consequential, but increasingly reckless and incompetent. So that's about it for this. I'll just kind of close up now. We've looked at the relationship of stereotyping, discrimination, and prejudice. We've looked at how groups are perceived. We've looked at the role of narratives in these processes to maintain and keep these ideas, the role of empathy for short-circuiting this, but how power can erode empathy. So it's a pretty complete package. It's hard to discuss any one of these ideas without discussing the other. So I hope this was useful, and this is just a strange little picture I took out of actually my third floor window here. We're up in the attic taping these, and this is the look out the window. So there's the alley behind the houses, but our giant Japanese silk floss tree out here will look like this come June or July. Maybe a little earlier this year. It seems like spring's coming on a little earlier. Regardless, I hope you're staying healthy. I hope you're staying well, and probably time to get on another one of these. So take care of you guys.